Okay, so for viruses, we don't place them into, viruses, we don't place them under this three domain classification at all. We remove them, but we still classify them. Okay, what kind of the viruses? Are you clear? So we don't classify under the three domains because very important, this three domain classification only for living organism. Okay, for living organism, not non-living thing. So viruses is a bit debatable in this case because they may have a certain characteristic look like living organism. For example, they do have the DNA and RNA, which are the genetic material. That's one. Second, they can reproduce, even though they cannot reproduce by themselves, they need the host cells. So we still classify them as non-cellular organism or non-cellular structure. Because of this, we classify them in the different system. Okay, unlike these living organism, we classify three domain. Viruses got few ways we can classify them. So let us go through these viruses. Okay, so what are viruses? They are microscopic parasites. Most of them, all of them, they are parasite definitely because they require host cells to reproduce. Okay, now the idea here, parasite doesn't mean that they need to get the nutrient from us. All right, okay. In the context of viruses, they do not need, okay, to get the nutrients, to get the protein, but they instruct our host cells to make their own proteins. Okay, so generally they are smaller than the bacteria, even though now we do catch some viruses are quite large. Okay, and the range roughly about 20 to 300 nanometer. So again, we do know that light microscope, okay, for those smaller ones, we won't be able to view them because of poor resolutions of the light microscope. So majority of them, we can see them by using the EM, the electrons microscope. As we say that they are non-cellular structure, so that's why we don't classify them under the three domains, okay? But these viruses, they must have at least these two materials. First, genetic material, and special for viruses, their genetic material, not necessarily DNA. If you look at the three domain classification, all living organism must be DNA, our main genetic material, but for viruses, it can be either DNA or RNA. So one of the common, the famous example nowadays for the virus, RNA virus, our COVID, okay, is RNA virus, okay? So then must have the protein code, called capsid, okay, surrounding this genetic material. So it means that for any viruses, for example, they can have any form of the shape. Let's say, for example, this shape and the genetic material. So they are very, very primitive and very, very simple structures. Okay, and some cases they may have the extra protective, okay, lipids, okay, surroundings, okay, of the protein code. For example, if you learn of HIV, they have this lipids layer. So, okay, this lipid layer is called as the envelope. Okay, it's called as envelope. So, in terms of their DNA, in terms of DNA, RNA, they can be a single-stranded or double-stranded. But in all living organisms, our DNA must be double-stranded. Okay, so you have the genome. Definitely. And viral genome are generally very, very small. They only code for essential protein, like protein, capsid protein. Sorry, I forgot to highlight the capsid. Capsid protein, enzyme, protein necessary for replication within a host cell. For example, like HIV. HIV want to replicate in the host cells, so they do have the enzymes, okay, to, for example, because HIV is a single-stranded RNA, so they need to have the reverse transcriptase, okay? So to make this single-stranded RNA into the cDNA, okay? So the capsid protects the nucleic acid from being hydrolyzed, and some viruses have a second protective layer known as the envelope. This normally derive from the cell membrane of the host modified and repurposed for the virus to use. And we do know that virus, they are parasites that cannot reproduce itself, so it means that they need to hijack the host cells protein synthesis mechanism, right? Because they don't have ribosome, right? They don't have ribosome. So how they're going to synthesize the polypeptides? They can't. So what they do? They have to hijack Okay, for example, you don't have the kitchen, you don't have the kitchens, you go and actually ask for your neighbor, can I use your kitchen or not? Right? Okay, so same thing. Okay, but at least after you use the kitchens for your neighbor kitchens, what you do? You say thank you, right? But viruses, they won't say thank you to you, but they lies yourselves. You break yourselves, because when they release the viruses, then you could break yourself. So that's why it causes the disease, because it destroys your tissues. Okay. So what are the classifications that we use for the viruses? So viruses, we are not, as I said, are not in 3-domain system. So the taxonomic system for classification of viruses, we do not have one system to classify all of them. It depends on which system you want to use. For example, the system can classify them based on the diseases that they cause. Okay, what kind of disease? Or whether it's only cause animal disease, not human disease. Okay, so diseases, or the type of nucleic acid they contain. So either they are DNA viruses or RNA viruses. And also whether these nucleic acids, they are single-stranded or double-stranded. Okay, so these are some examples. Okay, if I classify them based on the nucleic acid, it can be single-stranded RNA, double-stranded RNA, single-stranded DNA, or double-stranded DNA. So do not need to remember, guys. Do not need to remember. Just know that for viruses, we do classify them, even though they are non-living thing. Okay, we do classify them, but how we classify them? We classify them maybe based on the disease, what kind of disease, or we may classify them based on the type of nucleic acids, whether a single-stranded RNA, double-stranded RNA, single-stranded DNA, or double-stranded DNA. So that's all for the viruses that you need to know. Okay, so viruses, non-cellular structure, very simple. It consists of the capsid proteins, okay, or the protein codes that encapsulates their genetic material. So their genetic material can be DNA or RNA, so either single-stranded or double-stranded. So based on the genetic material, we can classify those viruses. Okay, so with this, I have done for the classifications. Let me stop the recording now.